If the book of Revelation describes kings, empires, wars, and an economic system capable of controlling everything, why doesn't the most influential country of the modern era simply appear by name? This silence is not a detail, it's a prophetic clue that forces a dangerous question. Is the United States the hidden center of the system, the temporary protector of Israel, or the power that disappears before the final climax? While the Middle East boils over again, Europe, as digital identity projects accelerate and the world gets used to surveillance and control, Daniel and Revelation seem to form a map that almost no one dares to put in the headlines. The starting point is uncomfortable. Revelation speaks of Babylon, of beasts, of coalitions and kings, but does not explicitly mention the United States. And this generates three prophetic readings that change everything. The first interpretation suggests that the United States is not absent. It is disguised as Babylon in Revelation, a center of luxury, commerce, and influence that suddenly collapses, causing merchants around the world to weep, as if the machinery of global consumption had come to a standstill in shock. The second reading points to Revelation chapter 12, where a persecuted woman receives wings of a great eagle to escape. For many interpreters, this may be a figure of protection and logistics in favor of Israel, something that appears once and then disappears from the text, as if the help were real but limited in time. The third reading is the darkest. Daniel chapter 7 describes a final system with 10 horns and a little horn that overthrows other powers. In this vision, a power can be uprooted, removed from the scene before the global government is fully consolidated, and its absence in Revelation would be the echo of this disappearance. Before deciding which is correct, one question needs to be posed. If the world is moving towards global control, which power would accept losing the center of the chessboard without a historic shock? Daniel was not given to satisfy curiosity. He was given to reveal the mechanics of empires and, above all, the final form of power before the eternal kingdom. In Daniel chapter 2, the image with parts of different metals ends in feet of iron mixed with clay, a symbol of alliances that attempt to unite what does not truly merge. Institutional strength on the outside, political fragility on the inside. And when one looks at modern Europe, many see this signature, a legacy of Rome, supranational structures, common pacts, but persistent internal tensions, as if iron were always fighting with clay on the same base. This reading is not just history, it becomes the setting for Daniel chapter 7, where 10 horns emerge, that is, centers of power that provide the basis for the final phase of global domination. And this causes Europe to reappear in the prophetic conversation as the heir to the Fourth Empire in its later stage. Here's the detail that connects to the video's theme. If there's a bloc that tends toward political and economic centralization, and if there's a military and financial power that currently sustains much of the international order, then the relationship between the two becomes crucial for the end times, not because the Bible mentions modern names, but because it describes functions. And this sets the stage for the question that almost no one wants to answer. Will the United States be the hidden engine of this system, or the obstacle that needs to fall for it to be born? The United States as Babylon hypothesis is frightening because it doesn't depend on fantasy. It depends on a pattern described in Revelation: global economic influence, luxury, cultural export, and a rapid fall that alters the planet's trade. In the prophetic material used by many preachers, the argument is simple. If Babylon makes nations intoxicated with its influence, and if its destruction causes mourning among the world's merchants, then the most obvious candidate in the minds of many is a modern center of consumption and media with international weight. The point that grabs attention is not just who, it's how. Revelation describes a sudden ruin, and so the contemporary imagination immediately thinks of cascading financial collapse, cyber attacks on infrastructure, currency panics, or an event that paralyzes supply chains in hours. And here the hidden role appears. If the world has been trained for decades to depend on digital systems, platforms, electronic payments, and interconnected logistics chains, then a failure at the core generates a domino effect that seems like prophecy becoming news. But there is a problem that prevents a simplistic statement. Revelation repeatedly calls Babylon a great city, and this allows for alternative interpretations, such as a specific urban center, an economic system, or even a future capital not yet fully revealed. So the question shifts and becomes even more dangerous. What if the United States is not Babylon, but the ground that sustains Babylon for a time, until the system itself discards them? The second hypothesis is almost ironic. The great eagle of Revelation chapter 12, which helps the persecuted woman escape, is seen by some as a symbol of providential protection, and by others as a symbol that can encompass a nation with the capacity to transport, to protect and sustain Israel during a critical period. The argument doesn't rely on a slogan, it relies on a pattern. The eagle appears, helps, and disappears from the text, as if the protection were real, but not the central focus of the final kingdom. This point is vital to the narrative. The hidden role of the United States in the prophecies may not be to reign, but to enable, to be the invisible hand that holds one phase of the chessboard until the final phase demands a different power architecture. And if the protection is temporary, then it can also be used as a bargaining chip. Security in exchange for alignment, alliances in exchange for concessions, and prophetic silence in exchange for an operational role that is not named in the text. The Middle East remains the prophetic epicenter of the world, and any serious reading of Daniel and Revelation inevitably leads to Jerusalem, alliances, and conflict. Therefore, a protector acting behind the scenes makes sense within the narrative, even if the Bible doesn't use modern geopolitical language. And then comes the question, if there is a protector, why does it disappear precisely when the global system reaches its peak? The third hypothesis is the one that most undermines national pride. The United States would be absent because when the latter system consolidates, that power will no longer have real sovereignty on the scene. Daniel chapter 7 describes horns and a ruler who removes some of them by the root. And the text used by many interpreters points out that this is not peaceful absorption. It is elimination, displacement, rupture. This reading creates a psychological effect. If the power that today seems inevitable can quickly disappear from the stage, then the prophecy ceases to be a religious curiosity and becomes a warning of historical fragility. And modern fragility doesn't have to come only from war. It can come from internal polarization, a collapse of institutional trust, digital attacks in energy and finance, and a breakdown of cohesion that transforms a giant into a collection of parts that no longer recognize each other. Here, the hidden role is the most paradoxical. While the United States appears to be the center, it may only be buying time for the global architecture to mature elsewhere, as if the current phase were the preparation of the stage and not the final act. This ties in with a question Daniel leaves hanging. The end doesn't come because everything is weak. It comes when a system is strong enough to control, buy, sell, and demand loyalty. And, for that to happen, obstacles need to be removed. The promise for the next block is straightforward. When the Middle East explodes, someone almost always tries to sell peace. And Daniel has already explained why that's dangerous. When the world pretends that the focus is only on politics, prophecy reminds us that the focus is spiritual. Daniel points to alliances and wars involving Jerusalem, and Revelation points to the final conflict converging on that region. And in terms of recent headlines, tensions between Israel and Iran escalated in 2025, with Israel declaring attacks amid nuclear tensions and Iran responding with missiles, according to a Reuters report. This doesn't prove a specific prophetic line, but it reinforces the scenario that the Bible has always presented. The Middle East remains volatile, and the whole world reacts when that ground trembles. The question then returns to the United States. In any major crisis there, the entire planet looks to Washington, not out of devotion, but for military power, diplomatic influence, and the ability to define red lines. And that is precisely why the silence of the apocalypse is so unsettling. If the prophetic text describes the climax without explicitly mentioning the superpower, two things can be true at the same time. The current role may be real and enormous, and the final role may be indirect, hidden, or already finished when the last phase begins. What if the greatest weapon of the end isn't a missile, but a system? A system that decides who participates in the economy and who is left out. Revelation chapter 13 describes a mechanism that haunts any honest reader. An economic control in which, without authorization, people cannot buy or sell, and many interpreters see this not as an isolated symbol, but as a system. And the real world is building pieces of this puzzle, especially in Europe. The legal framework for the European Digital Identity Card was adopted in 2024, with a regulation requiring countries to make at least one card available and to recognize those issued by others. According to the publicly available description, the goal is to enable interoperable digital identification and authentication within the European Union, and there are implementation and sector-specific acceptance deadlines over the next few years. It's not necessary to call it a brand to realize the potential. When identity, access, services, and transactions converge, the promise becomes efficiency. But the prophecy warns that efficiency can turn into coercion when a central power decides the rules. And here the hidden role of the United States returns with force. Most of the planet's digital infrastructure relies on technology, platforms, and standards that were born or expanded under American influence, and this creates a silent bridge between prophecy and reality. The burning question is simple. When the system is ready, who will press the button, and what crisis will the world be calling for? Before continuing, I feel that God has a special calling for you. I want to ask you to become an instrument to spread this message. Pause the video now, subscribe to the channel, and take the opportunity to leave your like. Every click you make can help others receive this same video on their devices right now, bringing this message to those who need it most. Don't wait. Do your part now. God may be counting on you to fulfill this purpose. In South America, the laboratory is different. Social instability, a desire for order, and the temptation to trade freedom for security create fertile ground for accepting digital controls as the price of stability. In Brazil, for example, Drex was described by the Senate agency as a pilot project with privacy and confidentiality tests, and the article stated that it could be launched in 2025. This is not automatically prophecy, but it is a sign of direction. Money and identity are moving towards the digital realm with programmability, tracking, and embedded rules, exactly the kind of tool that Revelation chapter 13 describes as useful for restricting buying and selling. And when societies live in fear of crime, economic crisis, or political upheaval, the offer to accept the system and everything will return to normal seems like mercy. But it may be conditioning for future loyalty. Daniel and Revelation don't just describe a tyrant. They describe a deception so well-dressed that many call it progress. And one of the greatest showcases of modern deception is surveillance. The prophetic material used by many preachers claims that control doesn't need to begin with a blatant global decree, as it can begin with digital identity, digital currencies, biometrics, and algorithmic mediation of everyday life. If the economy becomes permission, and permission becomes obedience, then buying and selling ceases to be an economic act and becomes a spiritual barometer, exactly like the warning in the apocalypse. In this scenario, the United States may be the hidden role behind the tools, an ecosystem of technology, security, and standardization that doesn't need to be mentioned in the text to operate as the backbone of the connected world. And this connects to another part of Apocalypse, the idea that the system dominates not only with force, but with seduction, promising convenience, protection, health, stability, and calling any resistance a threat to the common good. The tension increases when this is combined with wars and rumors of war. Crises push populations to demand control, and control paves the way for demands that previously seemed impossible. When peace becomes a magic word, Daniel warns us to be wary, and the world today is obsessed with this word. There is an old and always effective pattern. The world becomes exhausted and then accepts almost any architect of peace who seems to solve the impossible. Daniel chapter 9 speaks of a pact that seems to stabilize for a time and then breaks down halfway through, revealing that peace was an instrument and not a destination. That is why the phrase peace and security, recalled by many interpreters from Paul's letters, has become a warning. When humanity believes it has finally overcome chaos, it may be entering the corridor of ultimate deception. In the real world, popular leaders are promoted as problem solvers, and the emotional appeal is always the same. Leave politics to me, hand over your data, accept the new system, trust me, and everything will go back to normal. Here we include names that dominate global news: Donald Trump, Xi Jinping, European leaders, and figures from the Middle East. Not because one of them needs to be the final character, but because they all help to accustom the planet to a central idea, the idea that the world needs a mediator above nations. And when this mediator emerges with technology, economics, and narrative on his side, the question will not be, "He seems evil." The question will be, who dares to resist the man who brought order? Keep this question in mind so you don't leave the video. What if the greatest battle isn't between countries, but between conscience and convenience? Go back to Europe for a moment, because this is where Daniel is often underestimated. Iron and clay, unity and division, empire and fragmentation, and an attempt to organize the continent as a single body without completely erasing the nations. When the European Union builds an interoperable digital identity card based on legislation already in place since 2024, it is not fulfilling the apocalypse. It is demonstrating that the type of identity and access infrastructure described by many interpreters is already technically and legally possible. And what Daniel suggests is that in the end, power will not just be the army, it will be structure, laws, times, standards, and a type of governance that seems rational but requires alignment. If the world is moving toward a phase of 10 cooperating power centers, the crucial question is, which center offers the model? And for decades, the global model of finance, defense, and technology has been profoundly influenced by the United States, even when it doesn't appear explicitly in the prophetic text. This creates a suspenseful reading. The United States could be the temporary protector, the market that sustains modern Babylon, or the obstacle that needs to fall for the ultimate coalition to seem inevitable. What Apocalypse calls the fall in an hour doesn't have to be an explosion. It could be a system shutdown. Revelation chapter 18 describes merchants weeping because no one is buying anymore. And this is strange language for those who only think in terms of religion. But for those who understand commerce, it is the language of a collapse of trust. In prophetic study material, Babylon is not just moral sin. It is a machine that transforms luxuries into idolatry and dependence, and therefore its fall is not just a defeat, it is a blackout of economic flow. And observe how vulnerable the current world is. Sensitive supply chains, markets that react in seconds, societies that depend on digital payments, and a culture trained to live connected all the time, as if disconnecting meant dying. If this machine breaks down, the panic will not be local, it will be global, because the pain of the end, in Revelation, always has a global reach. And that is why the prophecy speaks of kings and merchants of the earth reacting. In this lens, the hidden role of the United States can be twofold. A power that fuels the machine for a time, and at the same time, a target or sacrificed piece so that a new centralization can be sold as salvation after the chaos. And this is where many people get lost. They look for a name, a country, a flag, but Daniel and Revelation speak of functions: to dominate, seduce, control, persecute, buy, sell, worship. When economic control fails, the system also tries to control the voice, the faith, and the message. Revelation chapter 12 shows spiritual warfare, and modern prophetic material insists that in the end, the persecution will not only be physical, but also informational, erasing, limiting, ridiculing, silencing. According to this same type of analysis, the West may experience a clean persecution carried out by policies, algorithms, platforms, and rules that treat biblical faith as a social danger, while calling censorship protection. And here, the hidden role of the United States becomes impossible to ignore. By concentrating a huge part of the global communication infrastructure, the country influences what is allowed to be said, promoted, and monetized. And this creates a perfect arena for a war that Revelation describes as a conflict against those who hold to the testimony of Jesus. This war doesn't need to begin with soldiers at the door. It can begin with the normalization of the idea that certain words cannot exist in the public sphere, and then society learns to self-censor, and the dragon wins without firing a shot. This also explains why an antichrist system doesn't need to appear as a villain. It appears as moderation, social health, order, stability, and only later reveals the central requirement: loyalty. And then the question returns with even more force. If the United States is the technological heart of this ecosystem, why doesn't the apocalypse name them? Is it because they are the invisible center, or because they no longer rule when the final phase begins? Given this, what does an average person do without falling into paranoia or naivete? Daniel was not written to create panic. It was written to produce discernment, because the end is marked by a well-presented mistake. The biblical response is not to set dates, nor to live in empty fear. It is to be vigilant, to remain faithful to Christ, and to see when the world is being educated to accept control in exchange for stability. This means observing the signs with sobriety: wars that push populations towards exceptional measures, economies that push for digital money, identities that become access keys, and leaders who promise to solve everything if you just surrender your autonomy. And it also means remembering that the prophetic center is not Washington, nor Brussels, nor Beijing. It is Jerusalem, because that is where alliances and conflicts converge, and that is why the whole world gets involved when that region is thrown into turmoil. The hidden role of the United States, then, may be to accelerate conditions, whether as Babylon, as an eagle, or as a power that gets out of the way. But the spiritual decision remains individual. What changes everything is not discovering a secret name, but realizing that Daniel and Revelation describe a path, crises that demand centralization, technology that allows control, and a deception that presents itself as a solution for a weary humanity. The United States may be hidden in the text for three main reasons used by many interpreters: as Babylon judged, as an eagle that protects for a time, or as a power removed before the climax, and each possibility is a warning not to idolize any nation. Now, take advantage and follow the channel to receive more videos like this and learn more and more about what is to come in our time. For hope lies not in predicting dates, but in remaining in Christ, because the biblical end does not end with the beast on the throne. It ends with the kingdom of God replacing all the kingdoms of this world.